The most dangerous moment in a hero's journey isn't when they face the dragon or cross the threshold into the unknown. It's when they first realize that everyone around them is still asleep. This isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's about the profound loneliness that comes when you can no longer participate in the collective dream that once felt like home. You find yourself sitting in familiar conversations, surrounded by people you've known for years, yet feeling like a stranger who speaks a different language. They're discussing the same complaints, the same pursuits, the same fears they've always discussed, and suddenly you see it all as an elaborate performance, a ritualistic dance around the fire of shared illusions. Joseph Campbell understood this moment intimately. In his mapping of the hero's journey, he recognized that the call to adventure often begins not with a grand summons, but with a quiet disconnection from the ordinary world. The hero doesn't leave because they want to abandon their people. They leave because they can no longer pretend that the masks everyone wears are their true faces. This is the sacred wound that initiates every genuine spiritual journey, the recognition that the mechanical patterns of daily existence, the endless conversations about nothing, the desperate grasping for approval and status, are all symptoms of a collective sleepwalking. When Campbell spoke of the ordinary world, he wasn't merely describing a geographical location. He was pointing to a state of consciousness, a realm where people move through their days like actors who have forgotten they're performing a role. They chase careers that feel empty, maintain relationships based on mutual reinforcement of ego, and fill every moment with noise to avoid the terrifying possibility of silence. The awakening hero begins to see through these patterns, not because they judge them, but because they can no longer participate in them with the same unconscious enthusiasm. This recognition creates what Campbell called the first threshold, not a physical boundary, but a perceptual one. On one side lies the comfortable familiarity of shared unconsciousness, where everyone agrees to keep the performance going. On the other side lies the unknown territory of individual consciousness, where the hero must learn to walk without the support of collective validation. The tragedy is that once you see the mechanical nature of ordinary social existence, you cannot unsee it. The comedy is that you realize this seeing is not a curse but a gift, the first glimpse of your own authentic nature, beneath the layers of conditioning and social programming. The hero's solitude begins here, in this moment of recognition. It's not chosen, it's inevitable. When you stop feeding the machinery of unconscious social interaction, the machinery notices. People sense something has changed, even if they cannot name it. They feel the absence of your participation in the collective dream, and this absence creates a disturbance in the familiar patterns. You haven't rejected anyone. You've simply stopped pretending to need what they need, stopped chasing what they chase, stopped fearing what they fear. And in that stopping, a space opens, the first breath of freedom in a life that had become one long-held breath. Campbell recognized that every hero receives a call to adventure, but he also understood that the most profound adventures are interior ones. The call doesn't come from outside. It emerges from within, like a voice that has been waiting patiently beneath the noise of ordinary consciousness. This voice doesn't speak in words. It speaks in discomfort, in the growing inability to find meaning in activities that once seemed important, in the deepening sense that there must be something more authentic than the roles you've been playing. The hero of inner awakening faces a unique form of crossing the threshold. There is no magical portal, no mentor appearing with a map and provisions. Instead, there is the gradual realization that solitude is not the enemy, but the doorway. The ordinary world cannot follow you into this solitude because the ordinary world is sustained by the agreement that solitude is something to be avoided at all costs. Everyone around you has learned to fear silence, to fill empty spaces with talk, to measure their worth by how much external validation they can accumulate. But the awakening hero begins to discover that in silence, something extraordinary happens. The artificial boundaries between self and world begin to dissolve. This is where Campbell's insights become most profound. He understood that the hero's journey is ultimately about death and rebirth, not in any literal sense, but in the death of false identity and the birth of authentic being. In solitude, the hero faces what Campbell called the belly of the whale, that dark night of the soul where all external supports are stripped away, and you must discover what remains when the performance ends. It's terrifying because everything you thought you were was built from external validation. from playing roles that others expected, from being useful or interesting or acceptable to the social world around you. But in this dissolution, something miraculous occurs. You begin to discover that beneath all the roles and masks and carefully constructed identities, there is something indestructible. Campbell called it the self with a capital S, the eternal, unchanging essence that exists independent of social validation or external circumstances. This discovery doesn't happen through effort or striving. It happens through surrender, through allowing the false to fall away until only the true remains. The solitude that once felt like exile reveals itself as initiation. The silence that once seemed empty reveals itself as pregnant with possibility. The disconnection from ordinary social patterns reveals itself as connection to something far more fundamental, the source from which all authentic relationship flows. You realize that true communion with others can only happen when you are no longer desperate for their approval, when you no longer need them to complete you or validate your existence. If this recognition stirs something in you, if these words feel like a remembering rather than a learning, then you are part of this ancient lineage of inner heroes. Consider joining our circle of fellow travelers by subscribing and sharing your own moments of awakening in the comments below. We are creating a sanctuary for those who have heard the call to authentic living, a place where solitude is understood not as isolation, but as the wellspring from which all genuine connection flows. Campbell knew that every hero must face trials, but he also understood that the deepest trials are not external battles but internal reckonings. The awakening hero faces the supreme ordeal of standing alone with their truth in a world that has built its entire structure on collective avoidance of truth. This isn't dramatic or theatrical. It's the quiet, persistent challenge of remaining authentic when authenticity makes others uncomfortable, of maintaining inner silence when everyone around you is drowning in noise, of refusing to participate in the elaborate dances of ego that sustain most human interaction. The hero learns that most relationships are based on what Campbell might have called mutual mythology, shared stories that both people agree to believe, even when those stories are not true. People bond not through genuine recognition, but through shared complaints, mutual validation of each other's illusions, and the comfortable agreement to never look too deeply beneath the surface. The awakening hero finds themselves unable to participate in these mythologies with the same unconscious enthusiasm. They cannot pretend to be excited about pursuits that feel empty, cannot offer reassurance when reassurance would mean reinforcing someone's delusions, cannot engage in the subtle competitions and power games that pass for connection in ordinary social life. This creates what Campbell understood as the hero's deepest isolation, not physical separation, but the loneliness of consciousness in an unconscious world. The hero sees clearly, but cannot share what they see without disturbing the very foundations upon which others have built their sense of security. They watch people they care about chase after things that will never fulfill them, engage in conflicts that are ultimately meaningless, and construct elaborate defenses against a truth that would actually set them free. The hero's compassion grows deeper, but their ability to participate in the drama grows smaller. Yet in this solitude, something extraordinary emerges. Campbell recognized that when the hero stops seeking external validation, when they no longer need others to complete them or confirm their worth, they become capable of a completely different kind of relationship. True meeting becomes possible, not the desperate clinging of ego to ego, but the recognition of essence by essence. These encounters are rare and cannot be manufactured. They arise spontaneously, when two people who have found themselves in solitude recognize each other across the void of ordinary social interaction. The hero discovers that authentic connection is the opposite of what the ordinary world calls connection. It requires no effort, no performance, no negotiation. It simply is, like water recognizing water or light recognizing light. These meetings sustain the hero through the long stretches of solitude, reminding them that the journey toward authenticity, while often lonely, leads to a quality of communion that makes all the superficial connections of ordinary life seem like shadows on a cave wall. To those of you who recognize this quality of meeting, who have tasted the difference between authentic connection and social performance, you are the companions I speak to across this digital divide. Your willingness to walk alone when necessary makes you capable of true togetherness when it emerges, Subscribe to continue this conversation and know that your solitude is sacred work, preparing you for connections that will nourish your soul rather than merely entertain your ego. Campbell understood that the hero's journey is incomplete without the return, the integration of hard-won wisdom back into ordinary life. But for the inner hero, the return is not a geographical movement, it's a way of being. The hero learns to live in the world without being of the world, to participate in the daily activities of human existence while maintaining the deep stillness discovered in solitude. This is perhaps the most challenging stage of all, because it requires holding two seemingly contradictory truths simultaneously: complete engagement with life and complete detachment from the outcomes of that engagement. The returning hero has discovered what Campbell called the treasure hard to attain, not a golden fleece or magical elixir, but the recognition of their own indestructible essence. They have learned to be alone without being lonely, to be silent without being empty, to be detached without being uncaring. This inner treasure cannot be lost or stolen. It exists independent of external circumstances, relationships, or achievements. From this foundation of inner security, the hero can engage with the world more fully than ever before, because they no longer need the world to be anything other than what it is. The integration happens gradually. The hero finds themselves able to participate in ordinary conversations without getting lost in them, to care deeply about people without needing those people to change, to work and love and create without attachment to specific outcomes. They have learned what Campbell recognized as the great secret, that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, not a test to be passed, but a dance to be danced. In practical terms, this means the hero can now engage authentically with both the awakened and the sleeping. They no longer feel compelled to wake others up, or frustrated when others choose to remain unconscious. They understand that each person's journey unfolds in its own time, according to its own mysterious logic. The hero's presence becomes a kind of invitation, not demanding or insistent, but simply available for those who are ready to step out of the collective dream. The solitude that once felt like exile has become a source of strength. The hero has learned to draw from the well of silence, to rest in the space between thoughts, to find refreshment in the pause between activities. They no longer fear being alone because they have discovered that in the deepest solitude, they are connected to everything. They no longer fear being misunderstood because they no longer derive their identity from others' perceptions. Campbell saw this as the ultimate boon the hero brings back to the community, not answers or teachings, but the living demonstration that it is possible to be fully human without being driven by unconscious needs and fears. The hero becomes what Campbell called a master of two worlds, equally at home in solitude and in company, in silence and in speech, in action and in stillness. They walk among the sleeping not as a teacher, but as a reminder, showing by their very presence that there is another way to be human, awake, authentic, and free. This is the sacred solitude Campbell recognized in every authentic spiritual tradition, not the escape from life, but the discovery of what it means to truly live.